Welcome to the Startup Leaders Show, where we learn lessons from leading startup founders and executives. I am your host, Lisa Dreher, and I'm really excited to introduce our guest for today, Robert Zubrin. He is the president of Pioneer Astronautics, and he is also the author of the recently released book, The Case for Nukes: How to Beat Global Warming and Create a Free, Open, and Magnificent Future. He also wrote the book, The Case for Mars. So welcome to the show, Robert.
Thanks for inviting me.
Sure. Maybe you can start by giving us just a little bit of background on Pioneer Astronautics, yourself, as well as the book, A Case for Nukes.
Okay. Well, I actually, my doctorate was in nuclear engineering, but I also have a master's in aerospace. And I worked a bit in nuclear in the 80s, but then I got a job with Martin Marietta, which is now Lockheed Martin, in 88, and most of my career since then has been in aerospace. And in 96, I left Martin, started my own company, Pioneer Astronautics, which does R&D on contract, primarily for NASA. We've also done it for the military and private companies and the DOE. We've done a multitude of projects, including most notably a lot of projects in the area that NASA calls in situ resource utilization, which is turning materials on other worlds into resources, for instance, making rocket propellant and oxygen on Mars out of CO2 and water, which is the basis of the Mars Direct plan that I outlined in The Case for Mars, and also is the basis of SpaceX's current plan of using the Starship to do Mars missions. That's why it is methane oxygen propelled. But we've also done other work. We've done work in propellant. We've done propulsion, rockets. We've done high altitude balloon work. We've done life support systems, recycling systems, and a variety of other things. And I'm also an author. I wrote the book, The Case for Mars. That's my most successful book. And that book attracted a very large readership, resulting in the foundation of the Mars Society, which is a nonprofit that promotes Mars exploration, and a number of other books. And then most recently, yes, I wrote the book, The Case for Nukes: How we can beat global warming and create a free, open, and magnificent future. And the magnificent future can only be free. And I believe that if it is free, it will be magnificent. And the key is to end any constraints caused by resource limitations. If resources are limited, if people believe that, it sets everyone against each other. I believe the idea that resources are limited is the fundamental bad idea underlying the great disasters of the 20th century. Great disasters of the 20th century were not caused by climate change. They were not caused by actual resource depletion. They were caused by the idea that there's only so much to go around, and so we have to kill them to get what is there, or to prevent them from taking it from us. Okay, and this is, in my view, this idea is the main threat to human civilization today. We are not threatened by there being limited resources. We're threatened by people who believe there are limited resources. We're not threatened by there being too many people. We are threatened by people who think there are too many people. Okay, now, nuclear power actually, can turn something that was not a resource before, namely uranium, which is all around us, by the way. The average block of granite contains enough uranium and thorium, which is also a nuclear fuel, that a kilogram of granite has equal energy content to 100 kilograms of oil. So when you look at mountains made of granite, you're looking at mountains of energy. Energy is not in short supply. And actually, if you go back further, oil was basically unknown as a resource prior to 1859. It was underground. Nobody really knew about it. We got our oil by hunting whales, and we were hunting them to extinction. But when it was demonstrated that we could produce something as good as whale oil just right out of the ground under our feet, okay, this released gigantic sources of energy for humankind. And really, if you go back in time, what you see, I mean, Land was not a resource till people invented agriculture.
Yeah.
How do you get food out of dirt? You can't eat dirt, okay? But if you invent agriculture, if you take advantage of knowledge that there's a fundamental regularity in nature, that the seeds of a given kind of berry bush, for example, produce only that plant, okay? And so you can create as many berry bushes as you want just by taking the seeds and putting them in the ground and providing them with enough water and so forth. Okay?
Right.
And you can vastly increase the food value of the land and so forth. So land is not a resource till we invented agriculture. Oil is not a resource till we invented oil drilling and refining and machines that could run on the product. And uranium was not a resource until we invented nuclear power. And currently there's deuterium, which is found in water, and a single gallon of water, of earth water, contains as much deuterium to make enough energy as 350 gallons of gasoline. And you want to know something? If you are on Mars, where deuterium is 5 times as common as is on Earth, a single gallon of water has enough energy as 1,600 gallons of gasoline. So there's no such thing as a natural resource. There's only natural raw materials, and it is human creativity that turns materials into resources. This is it. And that's why the people who believe in the population bomb are wrong. Because the more people, the more inventors. And the more inventors, the more inventions. And the more inventions, the more resources. That's why, there was this elite group called the Club of Rome. 1972, they published a book called The Limits to Growth, and they said, look, we're going to run out of everything by the year 2000. This is how many barrels of oil we're using a day. This is the size of the reserves. Divide this one by that one. And they had a computer to do that for them. So in case you doubted their long division, you could trust the MIT computer. And we're out in the year 2000. It's all gone. And in fact, we're going to run out of copper and zinc and you name it. We're going to run out of everything. This one will last until 2003. This one's going to be gone by 1999. But in approximately, 28 years, it's all gone. So all we can do is limit the amount that people consume. We need to reduce living standards, because the higher the living standard, the more stuff you use, and we're using it all. So this is their argument. And it's a deeply reactionary argument. It's an argument that says we need to essentially increase the price of basic goods, which is so that we limit access to them by people of limited means. And unfortunately, this is the argument that has been adopted by many in the global warming crusade today. That is, they say, well, the answer to this is to essentially increase the price of fuel and energy, and through one trick or another. And these methods, which can be variously called carbon taxes, though they're not all in the form of taxes as such, but they all have the same goal, is to make it more expensive, which means it impacts the poor. Okay. If you have $20 a gallon gas, that's not going to stop billionaires at all.
Yeah.
Okay. But it will deeply harm people in the lower income classes, or lower income countries. And so I oppose this program. I think it is unethical. And in fact, one thing, while people can argue about ethics, they have all sorts of philosophies. You can't argue one thing, which is that it has been wildly unsuccessful. That is, around 1990, governments became concerned about global warming due to carbon emissions. And to be clear, I believe that global warming is real. And I'll get to it in a minute. But so they said, we got to stop this carbon emission stuff. Well, since that time, and the Kyoto Treaty and so forth was signed to do this in 1992, the world has doubled its carbon emissions, okay, in the past 30 years, just as it did between 1960 and 1990, and between 1930 and 1960, and between 1900 and 1930. The world has been doubling its carbon use every 30 years, and it's going to double it over the next 30 years. And the reason is that energy is fundamental to all products. And the overwhelming majority of energy our society uses is based on fossil fuels. And so there's literally nothing you eat or use that wasn't produced with the aid of fossil fuels and transported to you with the aid of fossil fuels. And so standard of living is basically the amount of stuff you have. Well, it's proportional to the amount of fuel you use, either directly, not necessarily directly heating your house, but all the stuff you get, and your ability to travel by air and so forth, and all these sorts of things. And guess what? People don't want to be poor. They don't. And people, okay, and even tyrannical governments that are not elected understand that their continued rule requires delivering people the goods. You know, and if they can't, they'll be overthrown. So yeah, if you're a democratic government, you'll be voted out if you depress your economy. And if you're undemocratic government, sooner or later, you'll be overthrown when people get sick of being poor. And they know this. And therefore, the overall trend has been to allow measures that allow living standards to rise. And as they should be, okay? Because the main problem in the world today is poverty, okay? Poverty kills billions of people every year through starvation, disease, malnutrition, and it ruins the life of survivors. It forces them to take jobs that give them very limited opportunity to develop and use their human potential.
So Robert, what was the main reason you chose to write this book, The Case for Nukes? Was it a philosophical reason, or was
it is that we have to meet this need of defeating poverty, and we have to defeat this idea that resources are limited, which threatens us with a third world war, okay? Because I got to tell you, I happen to know for a fact that, because I have spoken to them, that there are people in major positions of responsibility in the U.S. National Security Council, not council, but establishment, more broadly, who believe that war with China is inevitable. Why? Because there's only so much oil in the world, you see. And if the 1.4 billion Chinese start driving cars the way we do, or even the way Europeans do, there won't be enough oil in the world. Okay, so we got to stop China. And you can bet your bottom dollar that they have people exactly like them in Beijing who look at this problem from the other side of the chessboard and come up with the exact opposite answer. Yeah, if we want to have what they have, we got to take it from them. And and if that's how it goes, there's going to be World War III, and we're living on bottom.
Wow.
Now, so we have to refute this idea. And the fact is that there's a technology that can produce enough energy to make it possible for every person in the world to have a decent standard of living, and more than what is currently considered a decent standard of living. Okay, it's nuclear power, and that's got to be let loose. Okay, the threat of general war comes from the idea of limited resources. But if we can show that only in a world of unlimited resources can all men be brothers.
Interesting. So I think that this premise, right, the case for nukes, there are maybe a lot of common misconceptions about nuclear power. What are the most common misconceptions, and how would you, I guess, refute those?
Okay, so the anti-nukes have promoted all sorts of hysteria about various putative dangers associated with nuclear power. They talk about radiation from the power plants themselves. They talk about the storage of nuclear waste as being an insolvable problem. They say nuclear power is too expensive. They say that nuclear reactors can explode like bombs. They say that commercial nuclear power plants can make plutonium that will be used to make atomic bombs. Okay, I think those are the 5 major ones. Maybe there's some others if you can think of them, bring them up. I go through all of them in the book. Okay, they're all wrong. Okay, first of all, in terms of routine emissions, fossil fuel plants emit much more routine emissions because coal, for example, contains radionuclides. It contains uranium and thorium. Okay, and that stuff goes right up the stack, and they release far more radiation into the environment than a nuclear power plant does. And the amount of radiation released by a nuclear power plant is so small that it's less than 0.1% of what people get from background radiation. Okay, there's all sorts of radioactive things in the environment, and I mean, bananas contain potassium, which is radioactive. So, okay, everything is radioactive, but nuclear power plants do not contribute materially in any way to the background radiation. Let's see, the storage of nuclear waste. That's an accomplished fact. The nuclear navy stores nuclear waste in salt caverns in New Mexico. Okay, the commercial nuclear industry is being blocked by the anti-nukes from having a nuclear waste repository of its own, with the stated purpose of trying to create an intractable problem for the nuclear power. Look, if you wanted to make cars impossible, just ban parking. Okay, you can say it's impossible to park a car. Why? Because there are laws against parking your car. So your car must always be in motion. And now you have a problem. Okay, so if you create a law against storing the nuclear waste, then you create a. So here's the anti-nuke saying nuclear waste is so unsafe. So they stopped the establishment of a waste repository under a mountain in a desert in Nevada, forcing the utilities to keep the nuclear waste on sites at nuclear power plants in the suburbs of cities. So how can these people argue with a straight face that it is safer to store nuclear waste in the suburbs than under a mountain in the desert? They can't. It's nonsense. Okay.
So is that the limiting factor? The ability or places to store that waste?
Well, no, we can store them.
We
can and do store them on site at nuclear power plants in the suburbs. That's where we're being forced to store it. Okay.
Is there a way to eliminate?
It adds to cost. Okay.
Yeah.
And it does add to hazard, because if there was a natural disaster that caused those storing places to be breached, then that would be released locally. Okay, it is better to store nuclear waste under a mountain in Nevada than storing it, in the suburbs of Chicago. Okay, that's just makes sense.
Is there a way to eliminate or minimize the amount of waste that's created?
Yeah, sure, you can do that too. But it should be understood, by the way, that no one talks about sequestering the waste from coal-fired power plants because it's impossible. Because it is millions of times, literally millions of times, the volume of waste from a nuclear power plant. Okay, you could take all the nuclear waste that has been produced in the United States since the launching of the Nautilus in 1954 and store it in a facility the size of a Walmart. Okay, whereas we've got square miles of ash from coal-fired power plants, and I mean it's just incredible. Okay, now that is not to say that coal is a bad thing. Coal was a great thing. It stopped the deforestation of Europe. Okay, because coal is cleaner than burning forests. Okay.
Yeah. What do we do with all the waste from the coal?
We leave it on hillsides and so forth, and it does cause local pollution and pollution of streams and so forth, as well as, of course, the stuff that goes up the stack, which causes. It's estimated several million people a year in Asia die every year from pollution from coal-fired power plants. Okay, actually, even more die from indoor pollution from wood-fired stoves. So you have to understand all these things are relative. Automobiles are cleaner than horses. Okay, we have a massive improvement in public hygiene in the cities by transitioning from horses to automobiles. Okay.
Interesting.
Okay. Now,
Interesting. So I've heard that there have been suggestions that using nuclear energy in space as part of our means of becoming more of a spacefaring species would be, I guess, preferable to some other power sources. Have you looked
well,
at
okay.
that
Well,
in your book at all?
yeah, sure. I discuss space nuclear power a lot, although most of the book is oriented towards terrestrial nuclear power. But certainly development of space requires nuclear power. Look, in space, you don't have fossil fuels unless you make them from another power source. You don't have hydroelectric power. Okay. There's no wind power on the moon, and even on Mars, where there is wind, the air is so thin that it doesn't amount to much. So your only choices are nuclear and solar. Now, solar power is very useful for spacecraft if you're in sort of the Earth regions of the solar system, and we do use them on Mars orbiters as well. But the further out you go, the thinner the sunlight gets, and the weaker it gets. And at Jupiter, sunlight is only 4% as strong as it is on Earth. At Saturn, it's 1% as strong. And then, of course, in interstellar space, it's absolutely negligible. Most of the universe is dark, okay, by far. You only have sunlight near a star. And then sunlight has other problems because on most planetary bodies, including the moon and Mars, you only have sunlight half the time. And that means you have energy storage issues using solar energy. So here's the thing. Solar and also wind, their greatest strength is in off-grid power. In other words, wind power played an enormous role in human history in powering sailing ships. Off-grid power, okay? Sailing ships transformed us into a global civilization 500 years ago when they acquired the range to sail around the world. So hats off to wind, okay? But for power at scale, it has a lot of problems because the wind is intermittent. For a sailing ship, it's a modest problem because, in a way, the energy is stored by whatever position the wind managed to get you to, and then you can resume sailing when the wind resumes. But if you're trying to power a city, you want power all the time, and intermittent power is not good. And solar is guaranteed to be intermittent because there's no solar power at night or when it's cloudy, and sometimes it can be overcast for days during the winter. So you need immense energy storage capability if you want to power something with solar power. So for off-grid power of small installations, solar and wind are winners. But for power at scale, for civilizations, no. Okay. So that's why fossil fuels are, frankly, so much more popular. I mean, by popular in terms of how much of it is used than wind and solar. Okay. Now, nuclear, like fossil fuels, can be 24/7. Okay. And by the way, if you want to know something, people talk about batteries. Okay, we'll store the energy in batteries. You take a lithium-ion battery, okay, and you take the amount of energy it can store. Okay, you would need 100 million kilograms of them to store as much power as there is in 1 kilogram of uranium. Or, put another way, you'd have to charge and discharge a 1 kilogram lithium-ion battery 100 million times, which is to say, if you did it once a day, it would take 300,000 years for it to provide as much energy as in the 1 kilogram of uranium. And of course, that energy doesn't actually come from the lithium-ion battery. It would come from another source that would have to keep putting it into the lithium-ion battery. So the nuclear energy is vastly, and of course, lithium-ion battery would not last 100 million cycles. Okay.
Yeah. So remarkable numbers. Yeah.
So this is the sustainable energy source, and it's present in vast quantities, and we need vast quantities because, okay, look, the average per capita income in the United States is $50,000 a year. And we have some poor people here. The average per capita income of planet Earth, taken as a whole, is $10,000 a year. So the average income of Earth is what would definitely put someone in the poverty class in the United States. And half the world is below average. So if we were to simply raise the world to the American standard of living, we would have to increase global energy production 5 times. Now, and that's a modest goal because, as I said, we have poverty here. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. There's people that are actually poor. They don't have the means to get by. And there are people who maybe have the means to get by, but not to send their kids to college or something like that. So this is a modest goal. That means 5 times. Now,
Yeah, amazing.
I have to tell you, okay, the people who talk about achieving net zero by 2030 or 2050 are talking absolute bullshit. Okay, we are absolutely not going to achieve net zero in 2030 or 2050. Okay, but what we must avoid is multiplying our fossil fuel use 5 times by 2050. Actually, based on current trends, will double our fossil fuel use by 2050. It'd be nice if we could blunt that a bit, but then we don't want to quadruple it by 2080 and eighttuple it by 2110, which is the trend. Okay, see,
Yeah.
that would be serious. Okay, the people who scream the world is blowing up are just discrediting themselves, because the people who are not true believers in this can look outside and see the world actually is not blowing up.
Mhm.
It isn't. Okay, I mean, it isn't. Okay, world is not burning up. Okay, but if we were to increase carbon use without limit, this would be a different story.
Mhm.
Okay? And actually, the first impacts, well, first of all, the first impacts of fossil fuel use is not even warming or carbon dioxide. It's conventional pollution, particulates, carbon monoxide, nitric oxides. This is the thing that's actually having health impacts now. Okay, and serious ones, which can be addressed by nuclear power. So I address millions of people every year dying from this kind of pollution. Now, the next problem from fossil fuel use, once again, isn't warming, which has only been 1 degree C since 1870. Okay, 1 degree C is like a New Yorker moving to central New Jersey. Okay, now actually, there's a lot more New Yorkers moving to Florida than to central New Jersey. Okay, so
Much more.
that warming is in fact the least problem that people worry about. Most people are looking to move to warmer places at the moment. So warming isn't the issue. Now, CO2 increase is another matter, because since 1870, the CO2 content of the atmosphere has increased from 280 parts per million to 420. That's a 50% increase. So unlike a 1 degree centigrade increase, which is immaterial, a 50% increase in CO2 in content of the atmosphere is enough to affect global chemistry. Now, in some respects, that has had benefits. Plant growth on land has actually accelerated due to that, because CO2 is a limiting quantity to photosynthesis to land plants. However, in the ocean, that is not true.
Wow, amazing. So, Robert, this has been so fascinating, and I feel like we've barely scratched the surface. But if people wanted to learn more about Pioneer Astronautics or the book, The Case for
Okay,
Nukes,
well, if they
what
want to
should they
learn
do?
more about Pioneer Astronautics, they can go to our website, which is pioneerastro.com. And if they want to learn more about the book, first of all, they could buy the book and read it. But if they want to learn more about it before they buy it and read it, they could go, first of all, to Amazon, where there's a lot of stuff written about the book associated with the listing of the book. There was also an excellent review of the book that appeared in Reason magazine online last week. And if people want to look up the case for Nukes, Reason magazine, I'm sure they could find that review. It was written by Chelsea Follett.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. It has been an absolutely fascinating conversation with some remarkable numbers that you shared with us, and hopefully we can have you come back again in the future.
My pleasure. There's the book.